On the death of his father, William the Conqueror, in September 1087, William II became King of England. William was the third-born son of William the Conqueror. His older brother, Robert Curthose, was overlooked as a potential King of England, as he had rebelled against William the Conqueror, and even got to the point where he could have killed his father. Robert lost his nerve at the last moment and fled, but William I could not forget his son's treachery, and Robert instead would have to make do with the Duchy of Normandy. Another of the Conqueror's sons, Richard, the second-born son, had died in an eerie foreshadowing of later events in a hunting incident in the New Forest. So the throne would pass to William II, who was aged about 30 at the time of his succession. But things would not be made easy for William II. Robert had no intention of remaining satisfied with being merely Duke of Normandy. As the eldest son, he felt rightly, despite his previous misbehaviour, that he should be King of England, and he had a fair share of support. Among Robert's key supporters was Otto, Bishop of Bayeux, and a half-brother of William the Conqueror. In Easter 1088, the plot against King William II began in earnest. The king's lands and those of his supporters were attacked and set ablaze. Bristol was attacked by Robert Mowbray, along with a bishop named Gosfrith. Their forces stormed Bristol Castle, ravaged it before moving on to Bath and surrounding areas. To the king's dismay, the rebellion grew ever more serious, as Robert's followers roused men across the country into open rebellion. Mowbray and his men gained further support in Hereford, and from Wales, men streamed into England, delighted at the opportunity to wreak havoc in their neighbours' lands. Worcestershire was burned, although men loyal to the bishop there, Wulfstan, marched out against the rebels and killed and captured a number of them. But destruction spread far and wide. In Kent, his own earldom, Otto, continued to ravage and plunder. William was utterly dismayed when he got word of this rebellion. As a new king, he was still unsure of how much loyalty he could expect from his subjects. If he wasn't able to muster enough support to put down this revolt, then potentially he could lose his crown to his brother. Desperate, the king made empty promises of ridding the country of heavy taxation that had been imposed on the people by his father. Whether they believed him or not, William's subjects did come to his aid. A force loyal to the king marched into Kent with the aim of capturing Otto, the chief architect of the plot. They stormed into Tonbridge Castle, where many of Otto's men were currently residing, although the bishop himself was absent. William marched on to Rochester, believing Otto to be there, but instead learned that Otto had retreated to his castle at Pevensey. William now began a 6-week-long siege of Pevensey Castle. Meanwhile, in Normandy, Robert, keeping abreast of the situation across the Channel, sent a force of men to back the rebellion. However, William's supporters were prepared for this. William at Pevensey was ideally placed to keep an eye on any unwelcome visitors landing on the south coast, and Robert's force was swiftly destroyed upon its approach, with many men either cut down by the sword or simply drowned. With provisions running low inside the walls of Pevensey Castle, Otto and his men had no option but to sue for peace. Otto agreed to leave England and also hand over to the king the castle at Rochester. But just when it looked as though the king had done enough to see off the revolt, some inside Rochester Castle had other ideas. Otto travelled with some of the king's men to formally hand over to them the castle, but some young knights decided they were not happy with this arrangement and took Otto and the king's knights hostage. William was forced to besiege Rochester as well, and eventually he took possession of it. Otto was now free to leave England, and he joined Duke Robert in Normandy. Otto vowed to join the First Crusade, which he did, but died in the early stages. With that done, William now turned his attention towards taking the attack to Robert in Normandy. The king imposed unpopular taxes in order to fund his campaign, with the Anglo Saxon chronicles calling the taxes illegal. And by 1090, William was inflicting some heavy punishment on Robert. William took castles at St. Valery and Ormale, garrisoning them with his own men. Robert asked the French king Philip I for support, and Philip obliged. William, however, paid him off. By 1091, William was ready to come to terms with Robert and agreed to help the Duke gain back control over Maine in exchange for Fécamp and Cherbourg. The agreement also arranged for William to become heir to the Duchy of Normandy should Robert remain without an heir, which he didn't, as a son was born to him in 1102, although William II was already dead by that point, meaning the arrangement was futile in that regard. And in return, Robert would be heir to the throne of England should William die childless, which he did, but Robert remained away on crusade at the time, allowing their younger brother Henry to become king. This arrangement did not please everyone. Edgar Atheling, son of Edward the Exile and grandson of King Edmund Ironside, had lands taken from him as part of the peace agreement and returned to William. Angry, Edgar sailed to the court of the Scottish king, Malcolm III, who happened to be his brother-in-law. Malcolm was married to Edgar's sister, Margaret, who was later made a saint. Whilst William may have been pleased with how things had gone in France, this was a potentially damaging oversight. Malcolm marched into England, sacking towns as he went. William, along with Robert, hastened across the Channel and marched north. Although the two armies faced off against one another, battle was avoided, and peace talks were held. For the time being, peace reigned, but not for long. Spending some time at William's court until Christmas of 1091, Robert began to grow suspicious of William and the strength of the agreement that they had reached. Robert returned to Normandy, accompanied by Edgar. In 1093, William II became extremely sick. As he lay bedridden in Gloucester, rumours began to spread that he was, in fact, dead. This wasn't the case, but at one stage, prospects had looked grim. He recovered, but William still had problems. Malcolm III, like Robert, had grown suspicious of the English king's intentions and demanded that William respect the treaty that they had signed. In response, William sent Edgar to Scotland and also some hostages in order to appease the king. But when a meeting was held between William and Malcolm, the relationship between the two kings broke irreparably. The Scottish king had been insulted by William's attitude towards him, and now returned home with the full intention of invading England once again. But Malcolm was defeated and killed at the Battle of Alnwick, along with his son and heir. Malcolm's queen, Margaret, died not long after hearing the news of her husband and son's demise. William was now presented with an opportunity to meddle in Scottish affairs. At his court was Duncan, a son of Malcolm III, who had been handed to William as hostage. Duncan wanted to travel to Scotland to claim the crown, but the Scots had proclaimed Duncan's uncle, Donald, as their new king. William, eager to help, aided Duncan's cause by providing him with men, both English and French, for an invasion army. Duncan was initially successful, becoming king for a few months before his uncle returned and defeated him, establishing himself once again as King Donald III. By 1094, William and Robert's relationship continued to be tense. Although peace talks were held, they were done so in an extremely tense atmosphere, and it was obvious that William was stringing Robert along. He wanted to gain control of Normandy, hook or by crook. William gained the support of his other brother, Henry, and throughout 1094 and into 1095 continued to make gains against Robert. Meanwhile, in England, William was plagued by issues with the Earl of Northumbria. William marched northwards, capturing Tynemouth, before marching on to the historically important castle of Bamborough. Realising the siege would be a difficult one, William built a temporary fort which he garrisoned with his men before he returned south. The Earl would eventually be captured. William then campaigned in Wales, but failed to subdue the Welsh in satisfactory fashion, as the Welsh employed guerrilla warfare tactics against the king. William returned home, having achieved little. In 1095, Pope Urban II preached what would become known as the First Crusade. All of European Christendom was seized by a feverish desire for holy war, as they sought to aid their Christian brothers and sisters in the Holy Land who were under attack from the Seljuk Turks. Men and women from both great and lowly rank responded to the Pope's calls in astonishing numbers. This included Robert, Duke of Normandy. Even though what the Pope asked from his crusaders was practically unheard of, it was obvious that huge expenses would be involved. Robert needed money, and so, in return for a generous financial payment, he handed over control of Normandy to William and prepared to travel east. Robert would know that should he return, he would have a difficult time establishing himself in any sort of position of power again, but fighting what he and many others would consider to be God's war, this would have mattered very little to him. As for William, he now had both England and Normandy in his grasp, but this all came at a price for the king, literally. To raise the sum of money that Robert required, the king had to impose again heavy taxes. This caused huge discontent in England, and to make matters worse, it coincided with a dreadful famine. Also in 1096, a count named William of Eu was accused of treason. He was forced to fight a trial by combat and lost. The king ordered William of Eu's eyes to be put out before he was castrated. The count died soon after. In 1097, Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, travelled into self-imposed exile. He had been at odds with William II for some time and had grown disillusioned with not only the king, but also with what he saw as widespread corruption in England. In the north, William continued to meddle in Scotland, sending Edgar Atheling once again on campaign, this time to depose Donald III. This was achieved, and Edgar installed as king another Edgar, who was a son of Malcolm III. The final couple of years of William II's reign were dominated by complaints of heavy taxes. William II died whilst out hunting in the New Forest on the 2nd of August 1100. A man named Walter Tyrrell had been aiming at a stag when he let fly of an arrow which instead struck the king through the heart. Was it an accident? Possibly. The sun was setting at the time, and so vision would have been far from ideal. Years later, Tyrrell also swore blind that he had nothing to do with it, and claimed that he had not even seen the king out hunting that day. Also out hunting in the New Forest on the 2nd of August 1100 was the king's youngest brother Henry. The death of William II, combined with the absence of Robert on crusade, played nicely into Henry's hands. But this is purely circumstantial evidence, and we'll likely never know whether it was an accident or murder. But as for William II, what type of king was he? He was not without his good points, certainly. He was clearly a capable soldier and leader of men, but he lacked tact when it came to his relations with the church. Like his father, his handling of taxation was obviously excessive. However, the Anglo Saxon chronicles' description of him as being hateful to nearly all his people and abominable to God is clearly over the top. William II won't rank as one of the greatest medieval kings England ever had, or even middling at that. He lacks charm and was quite obviously greedy, but his reign was certainly not the disaster that it's sometimes made out to be.